Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Happy Tuesday. You're on America's Some Assembly Required. Anna hasn't quite joined us yet, so I'll tell you a little bit about my weekend this weekend. So one of our topics today is going to be about militia education. And I always take and encourage people that when you're out and about, whether that's just kind of shopping around your city or in different places around your state or the country, that you look in the antique stores for books, because I found some very valuable old books that help us in some of the education for our assemblies, and be able to kind of provide us some interesting references. And a lot of times they're very inexpensive. So this weekend, we had a large garage sale where I live, and everyone puts out their goods and things. And one of the stops that I made was to our local resale shop, because they receive a lot of leftover items from the garage sales and things. And I found this wonderful book. And what it is the American Medical Association Encyclopedia of Medicine. And it's from 1989. So not that old, but in it is a wealth of information that our militias can use in terms of first aid training. And, part of our education within our assembly militias is we all need that extra training for first aid. Many of us have taken, maybe in the course of our job, a little first aid training class, or as part of the human resources department, if you're a supervisor, kind of recognizing some of the general items and conditions that you need to watch for if somebody's, having a heart attack, if somebody's having a stroke, how to use AED paddles, if, just different things. But there is a whole world of medicine out there and symptoms that we need to be aware of, that work in conjunction sometimes with the disasters that we may encounter on our states. One of the things that you need to be aware of is dysentery and how to treat it. Because if your water systems go badly, then dysentery is something that can enter into the equation for your first responders. So I'm going to bring Anna to stage. She's just joined us, and I'll let her catch her up. Hi, Anna. How are you? Hanging in there. Can you hear me? So you might have to go down to your settings. I'm hearing sound from you.
Lisa, dear, I can't hear a word you're saying, and I don't know why.
Okay, good. Now I'm going to text you.
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you now. I'm fiddling around with some settings here.
Okay, we hear you fine.
Great. All right. Yeah.
All right.
Mission
accomplished. I love it when they play with your computers, right? So Anna, I was telling everybody just as we started that we had an all-island garage sale this weekend. One of my favorite things to do, besides visiting, is going and seeing what other people have out, little gems that you find along the way. And I'm encouraging everybody to, look in some of their antique stores at their books, because I find gems in antique stores all the time. Things that will help our assembly, and inexpensive items a lot of times. So one of the things I found this weekend was the American Medical Association's Encyclopedia of Medicine. And yeah, $3, right? $3. It has all kinds of things in it, even down to simple surgical procedures that could be employed or taught for field medicine for our assemblies, right? And so, today's topic is about militia education. And these are the kinds of little gem resources that we can put together for our militias to be able to have references that we can use to train on, right?
Right. And, this becomes part of the archive and the information available for the people in your assembly. But it also, as you find these little gems, as you say, can be spread out to the other members, other assemblies. You found this great reference book. You weren't expecting it to be such a great reference book, but when you got to looking at it, you said, hey, this shows us how to do an emergency tracheotomy. This
Yes.
shows us how to do, splits. This tells us how to do, and so now we can be on the alert, and all the different assemblies can be looking for a copy of the same book or something very similar, and in series. So that's invaluable information.
Right, right. And it's not that old that the techniques in it aren't, they're not 1700s or 1800s brutal medicine. There's a lot of good anatomy and everything else that's in it that can help. And as I was explaining to everybody, last week we talked about organizing provisions and looking at the disasters traditionally on our states.
Right.
But the way we also need to look at some of our militia education is in that same way. For example, the way we look at our first aid training, there's going to be general first aid, and then we have to look at sometimes the types of things that we run into specifically to the disaster itself. So we have a hurricane or a major disaster that takes out our water or our sewer systems. We have to be on the alert, and we have to be watching for signs and symptoms of dysentery, and how to treat it, how to prevent it, how to treat it, and what we're going to need in terms of supplies to be able to take care of those kinds of conditions when they arise, right? So, being able to know in first aid how to properly splint a major break. What are the arteries involved in a major break, and what we have to watch for to keep someone from having that break possibly nick an artery and cause them to bleed to death. Those are all things that we have to think about, right?
Right. And the people who are most devoted to thinking about that are the militia leaders. We all need to know basic first aid. We all need to be ready to deal with things like a need for potable water. How do we keep our water clean? How do we ascertain whether or not our water is clean? What are the elements of a good sanitation program? Basic sanitation for a household. How does that affect basic sanitation for a community? We all need to be thinking about these very basic things that we take for granted, because in an emergency, as the people in North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee and South Carolina and Georgia found out very recently, in an emergency, all of those systems can shut down, and we don't always know how long they're going to be shut down. We've had communities in Texas that have had water supply problems for 6 months as a result of flooding that took place in the fall.
Right.
So, sometimes these problems don't just go away in a few hours.
Right.
Sometimes we have to deal with them for months, and we have to have a plan, and we have to have means, and we have to be prepared in advance to deal with these issues, because when it happens, it's too late.
That's right. That's right. So, first aid is one of the obvious training um, modules, I guess, and courses that we need to be starting to work with within our militia. But I want to back up a little bit because I want to reframe the idea of training and what training we're supposed to be doing. Are we are we supposed to be out there training like the military? Are we supposed to be doing training drills? Um,
Well, originally, the militia was conceived of as an in-state army that was, it was, it has and still does have the permission to have large artillery. So, for example, you could have cannon.
we have them on Putin Bay. So we still have cannons all around the harbor.
you know, so um, the militia isn't limited to small arms or anything like that. The militia can have mortars and uh, you know big guns and artillery. It can have the same kinds of armaments as the National Guard has. All right, but I think that our focus over the time, as we've paid for professional protection, has altered. Now our job is to properly direct all these professional soldiers that we have, to one extent or another, equipped and employed in our behalf, and regain control of those facilities and organizations under contract, and then to supplement their capabilities with our own. Now, over the past 80 years, we've overspent ourselves on quote unquote defense. And this has been because the foxes have been guarding the hen house. And frankly, the military, which is a mercenary force at this point, saw it was to their advantage to not only have a standing military, which we have in the form of all the familiar Air Force, Navy, all the rest,
Army, Marine.
but they also developed what they called national guards. And this is another one of their verbal deceits, because every nation state has a militia, and those militias, in that sense, were national guards, right? But they were serving the actual state. They were not serving the state of state interlopers, who are actually British territorial organizations. So they took the concept of the nation state, and so they called this the National Guard, and they overtook our state militias and renamed and relabeled and rebranded them and put them under new management, and created these National Guard forces. It was all done illegally and under conditions of fraud. So we basically still own all of the equipment and everything. We paid for all of this, and we are in the process of imposing the contracts and regaining control of the National Guards. So that would have been our militia. See, they suborned and insinuated and pulled their substitution fraud scheme with that, just like they pulled everything else.
Correct.
And now they're caught. Now they are in the position of having cheated and defrauded their employers and misrepresented themselves. Um, we're in the process of regaining control of our national guards as guard
Our
for our
nation
state.
guards. Right.
Right. Guards
Right.
for our nation state. The fact that this was not kosher and that they were not operating properly is seen in the fact that they were using these quote unquote national guards under the British territorial state of state control to go to foreign countries and fight in actual, continued mercenary conflicts. And we're using them as cheap replacements for the professional military.
Right.
All of this is very wrong. All of this is very illegal. All of it's very unlawful. And all of it is repugnant to our states and our nations. But in any event, these so-called National Guards will be reconfigured, relabeled, and rebranded and placed under different different command structures again, and they'll be brought home. They will no longer be used outside the borders of their own state, which is the entire idea of our kind of National Guard.
So that brings the resources that they have back to our states.
Right.
And brings that back into the ability for us to as we've said before, our point isn't to do away with them. It's to have them honor their contract and to cooperate with us to get the jobs done on our state.
Right. And, we already then have a force in our state that should be under our control, not theirs, that is fully equipped and competent and modernized and able to defend the borders of our state or any other tasks that may be assigned to them. Okay, so we already have the heir apparents to our original state militias organized, and the only problem is that they're under the command of the wrong person. They're under the command of a British territorial state of state governor instead of being under the command of our state assembly. Mm-hmm. And but in the meantime, why should we have to pay to create another entire force when that force was developed from our militia? Right. And why should we have to go through any big argument about this with our employees? So we already have, in the form of the quote unquote National Guard, a modern fighting force. So we don't need a modern fighting force. What we need are communities that are organized to take care of themselves. Remember that sovereignty is a many splendored thing. One of the aspects of sovereignty is that sovereign entities are freestanding and independent. They don't depend on other organizations. They don't ask somebody else to underwrite their mistakes. They are self-sufficient. And when we set out on this course, then we are setting out on an adventure where we are going to discover that there are many, many holes in our defense. We are not organized anymore to deal with things like wildfires. We're not organized anymore to deal with floods. We're not organized to take care of our own in the event of a epidemic. We're not prepared for natural disasters like dust bowls or, pollution events, a major chemical spill or something of that nature. We're certainly not prepared for any invasion. These are things that over time, quote unquote, professionals have usurped away from the communities. and have convinced the communities to pay for all these additional services that then leave the communities dependent on these bought and paid for professional services. Now, once you get to looking at it, you realize that many of these quote unquote experts and professionals that we've been paying for have not done their jobs. And so you have situations where your water quality is not what it should be. You have poisons placed in your water. You have unsupportable, horribly expensive crony contracts to produce water and electricity for your communities. You have all sorts of criminality and graft going on that you're no longer in control of because they have come in and they've wheedled around and they've convinced a certain small number of people who are participating on some sort of city council or county community group or whatever that they needed to commit county resources to these contracts, these commercial contracts. And then the people have just walked away and left the experts to do whatever the experts would do. Well, these experts have fleeced everybody blind, and they have not performed on their contracts, and they've not been accountable for their problem. They just kind of, oh well, if you don't have electricity for 6 days, we're still going to charge you as if we provided that 6 days of electricity when we didn't. Okay. Oh, well, you haven't had access to natural gas for 6 months that you paid for, but we're going to charge you the same.
Mhm.
And these arbitrary utilities have taken over our communities and have shut down private wells so that people no longer have private wells in case of an emergency. They're totally dependent on quote unquote municipal or city water. And then the rainstorm comes, and then the drought comes, or the pollution event comes, or whatever, as happened with Lampasas, Texas. All of a sudden, a dead cow gets stuck in the intake of the community water facility, and then everything goes upended, and nobody's accountable, nobody's responsible, nobody has a plan to replace the water, nobody has a plan to filter the water. Everybody's standing around scratching their heads, and they have no money because they've already paid all their money out to this flim flam corporation that was supposed to provide them with water, and they're not they're not providing the water, but they're charging the people for the water just the same as if nothing had happened.
Right.
And go to your tap and it smells like dead cow.
Right.
You know,
So with our National Guards, and I think we've talked about this once before, where once our assemblies get to a point where we can begin to really have the force of effective directives on our states, that we could possibly even recall those National Guardsmen back to their national jurisdictions.
well, or you could tell your state of state governor, call out the National Guard, and we need them to do this. Boom. And
Yep.
that's what should be happening.
Right. And so how does we started this with, do we need to train in a military way for our people? Obviously, our people need to know how to conduct security in the event that we have an event where they have to provide security. They have to know how to use a weapon properly, how to do situational awareness on a scene, all of those things.
Self-defense.
That's not, pardon?
Self-defense.
Yes, self-defense, exactly. But that's not necessarily in a full military capacity, because you've said before, if need be, we would be the guerrillas behind the trees or in the trees or behind the rocks. And so with with that idea, we're doing basic training in that way, self-defense and arms training and maintaining our arms. That's one set of whole training to get our people competent, because there's a lot of people out there who think they know how to fire a gun, and really don't, you know.
Right.
They want to be cool with it, but they're not accurate. You know, they think they can just point it, but they're not looking at what's around them to have to avoid in those ways. So that's one side of our training that we can do. Our assemblies could simply, once a month, our militia could say, "Hey, everybody, let's go to this particular range in this area, and we'll all meet there. And we're going to do a safety gun course, and we're going to start to learn how to really fire our arms well." And they could just, meet up in those areas, or in those situations. Somebody has a farm, they can, got people who are trained to provide that type of training, could go out and do that training, on one of their farms. And a lot of people don't realize how far an actual bullet can travel. Even if you shoot it in the air, it can come down and it can kill somebody.
Right.
So, there's a lot of people that have really a lot of misconceptions about arms, and they need that arms training, that basic self-defense training. And just all of those things. So that's one area, that's one aspect, without being military, that our militias can train in, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And really, the advantage of being local is that you have the opportunity to do your own logistical plans. Where are your supply routes? Where are the choke points in the road system? Where if you had an invasion, where would you place obstacles?
Right.
Which bridges would you blow? Which,
Right.
you need to have a logistical plan for a wide range of different eventualities.
And we're going to talk about that next week in operations when we get there. So, what other types so we've talked about general first aid, specific first aid. We've talked about arms training. What would be on your list of training that you would think we really need to have our militias begin to focus on in terms of training?
Well, I think that self-defense is one of those things that's very neglected, but a very necessary part of dealing with any emergency. And also effective group action that can lead to appropriate results. When things really go down, certain things always happen and should be expected, but aren't. And let me give you an example. During the North Carolina event with Hurricane Helene, we had members of FEMA trying to commandeer state organized rescue efforts. And by state, I mean organized by members of our assemblies within the state. Okay. And so, for example, some of our members grabbed a excavator that they owned and started using it to clear trees off the road. And we had FEMA and National Guard people come in and tell us, "Oh, you can't do that." Well, who says we can't? Where the hell's your authority to say anything to us? You're our employees. We didn't grant you any authority to tell us that we couldn't remove fallen trees from roadways. Oh, this could have gone on for decades. It could have, we could have still been arguing about this, but instead, we went straight to the governor's office and said, clean it up, get them out. And they didn't have any options. They had to stand down the National Guard and they had to stand down FEMA. And they had to allow private rescue operations because that's already part of the law. Okay, and we are properly standing in our jurisdiction, so they had no way to boss us around and say that that was not applicable or anything like that. All because we had a state assembly already set up and functioning prior to the storm, right?
Right.
If we hadn't had that, then we could have been standing around with a doodad in our hair, and those roads wouldn't have gotten cleared, and people wouldn't have gotten relief. They wouldn't have gotten water, they wouldn't have gotten food, they wouldn't have gotten fuel that they otherwise got. Because at the baseline of every single kind of natural disaster, who's there on the spot?
The people.
The local
Who's in
people.
charge? Who's in charge?
The local people.
That's right. So, so that's important. You know, I talked to our assembly this morning about their voice. If we're not using our voice, then we're missing a large part of who we are. And you know, we need to be able to step up and say what we want, ask questions about what's going on. That's important.
Well, the primary
that's
job.
Training too. Yeah, it's just part of our training too, right? If you see something, I'll use their phrase. If you see something, say something, right? So, yeah, you know, it's important, especially in our disasters, as we face that. You know, if we see something being misused or obfuscated or obstructed, we need to say something. So,
well, and there needs to be a clear hierarchy of authority in any kind of a disaster. There should be, you know, number one, awareness of the state assembly in the state government, and we should be telling our public employees what we want done. You know, we should be the ones setting the priorities for them in war, in peace, when there's a disaster, and when there isn't. We're the bosses, we're the employers. And so we should be telling our employees how high to jump, when, where, and how. You know, we're actually the ones that are in charge, and we haven't been doing our jobs.
Correct.
And so our state assemblies need to have a good plan in mind. They have to have a clear chain of command so that when a disaster strikes, we have our people already in place telling the state governor what we want done, where, when, and why.
Right.
You know?
So let's talk about some other training things. Obviously, if we have a disaster, we may need to put up a large tent. That tent may be for medical, that might be for food, that might be for shelter, that might be for housing for our militia. It just really depends. So having an idea how to work together as a team, you know, sort of like the Amish barn building that I put on the front of our, that's symbolic of what we need to do in a fine-tuned way to enact structures in a disaster that we can, you know, use to provide structures, you know, in shelter and services for our militia and for the communities that we serve.
Absolutely. One of the biggest problems in every single kind of disaster you can think of, you have to have storage points for supplies. You know, suddenly you've got semi-trucks headed your way from all over the country, carrying everything from mattresses and clothes to kitchen implements and fuel. And there, you know, suddenly everything's wiped out. Where do you store this stuff? Okay, so you have to have a plan. You have to have a capability of throwing up large tent type structures to cover these supplies coming into distribution points, distribution hubs. We had to set up helicopter aerodomes. Okay, we had to set them up on site wherever we could put them. And then we had to set up storage facilities, storage tents or storage buildings, or make use of whatever was there already to shelter supplies that were being packed out by the helicopters. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, if our assemblies had been just a little bit more developed and it had their militias already set up and had, um, established different points where they could set up helicopter fields, well, wouldn't that have been nice?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the other things that I will suggest is maybe there needs to be a little training in terms of, some big toy training, like how to run a bobcat, how to run a front end loader, how to run possibly a bulldozer, how to run a dump truck, because in today's world, those things are not still automatic. You have to be able to know how to use your feet and your hands at the same time. I go back into it from the time I was, well, little. My dad had a distribution business. We learned to run a forklift, right? I've run a forklift since I was about 11 years old. I learned to run a bobcat, when I was about 14, 15. I learned to drive a stick when I was 14 years old. And henceforth, I can drive just about anything that's made. It takes me a few minutes. I might not be real smooth at it to begin with, but I can drive just about anything there is. I know tank drive. I know, uh, stick shift. I, 3 on the tree, you name it. I've driven it, in my day. So, being able to run some of this equipment is something that's important. And those states that have, for example, large water resources, like Ohio does, there are going to be some people who need to be trained on the proper operation of a boat,
Or
um,
pumps.
or pumps, or there's all types of things that we need to be looking at little bit by time. And if we're really targeting that age group, that is that 21 to 45-year-old age group, they need to know that. That's what they need to be trained on. Many of us older folks already know how to do that, believe it or not. But we've got to be able to train the younger ones on how to do those operations as well.
Another issue is hydroelectric plants. All over this country, there are hydroelectric plants that are mothballed. Why? Because the oil companies wanted the money from oil being burned to produce electricity. And so they came in and they schmoozed the local people and they said, well, even though you have this free element here that's producing electricity, you should shut down your hydroelectric power plant and just buy all of your power from us. Well, this was again giving away our power, literally, not just electric power, but our power of self-determination. And when we did this, we became dependent. Okay, we gave away our sovereignty in that area, and we bowed down to the oil companies, and we became dependent on the oil companies. And we did not get the advantage of our investment in our hydroelectric plants. We could be selling back power to these other corporations and getting the benefit of that for our people. But instead, all these hydroelectric plants are sitting around mothballed at a time when the other forms of electrical power generation are unstable and quite possibly going down the tubes. Okay, what happens when you no longer have diesel to feed into your big turbines?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
but the water's still going to be
Electric car on that, can you?
right. But the water's still going to be flowing over that dam.
That's right.
Okay, so how stupid are we that we've given up our hydroelectric plants and mothballed them when we could be benefiting from the power that they generate and have the benefit of a more stable and reliable form of electrical generation.
Right.
You know,
And hydropower runs 24/7 for the most part.
right.
Um, it's constant and it's ever flowing. So I mean, it's sort of like developing. In some ways, there's some developments in terms of wind power, not in the not in the big turbines that you see with the blades, but in vertical turbines that function in low wind power and also in high wind power. And so there's some developments on the front for that as well, to be able to get those in. Um, so let's talk about states that have mountains and mountain regions. Um, Ohio is kind of a mixed bag here because we do have mountains. We have the beginning of the Appalachian Mountains on the eastern side of our state. And then we have plains to our north and central part. And so, in our mountains, but then also most of our cave system is actually into the plain areas. So we've got a couple of things. You have your mountainous areas where you may need to train for rescue in those mountains so that you've got rappelling and proper rappelling equipment and techniques to be able to do that, and how you rescue and bring somebody out of a ravine. Those types of area trainings. And also, on the opposite side, in a lot of those areas, you have caves, good spelunking techniques, caving techniques. What do you do in those areas? How do you do that safely? What do you find when you get into those caves? What are all of those things are things that on our states in certain areas we need to train for.
Well, absolutely. And we need to take stock of our natural resources to a far greater extent. We have to have a better people oriented development plan. In a lot of states, you look at their electrical grid, not to say that the electrical grid is going to be a permanent part of our lives going forward, but just looking at the past, you look at the state's electrical grid and you see that there are all these huge electrical extensions going off to nowhere for nobody, for nothing. And you're sitting there going, now, why did they put in an electrical line with this much voltage to this location? Oh, well, there was once upon a time a taconite mine there. And now the mine shut down, the ore played out, and we've got all of this infrastructure and all this investment in electrical lines and water resources and everything else that's sitting out there in the middle of nowhere doing nothing for nobody. And yet we're having to maintain it as part of the expense, the ongoing expense of maintaining the infrastructure. There was no plan. Okay, there was just a temporary need, and so they bust through these electrical lines and they bust through all these other infrastructure things, and then they sit there and decay. And you've got farmland that's being used and affected by these giant emplacements that don't need to be there. And yet nobody has sense enough to take them down. The temporary cost of taking them down versus the long-term cost of having to maintain them doesn't even get discussed. And yet if the people who are local actually got a chance to eyeball the question, they'd realize in short order that, hey, maybe we should invest in taking these down and redeploying the materials to some other location for some other purpose that would actually serve a substantial population, and we could get rid of the maintenance cost. Oh my, wouldn't that be smart? These are the kinds of conversations that need to be going on, and they're the kinds of conversations that our assemblies are supposed to be doing. Our job is to tell our employees what to do. And for 160 years, the employees have been running the show. So it's time for us to take back our responsibilities and our role and do our job and tell people that are in our employ what we want done.
Right. Right. So let's talk about some other training. What other types of training things can we suggest to our militias? You know, I had the experience and the honor to attend Tennessee Assembly in February, and to attend they had a militia gathering that same weekend as well. And one of the interesting things I saw and noted about their militia gathering was, besides all the great food that they had and things and the talks that they did, but they had stations set up around the weekend, and some were playing chess and teaching chess, how to teach strategy,
Mhm.
and some were learning to, play guitar. Some were working on knots. There was a knot station where they were tying different types of knots, nautical knots, as well as tent knots, and all of those types of things that go on. Um, it was really interesting for me, and I thought it was very worthwhile, the education that Tennessee was doing. Um, and and viewing how they mixed all the different generations in the different activities, right?
Mhm.
So, talk to us a little bit about that approach to militia, because I know you've said that before, that our militias, sort of operate in training that way too.
Yes, that's exactly it. We have community-based training. We include everybody, young and old. We have an inclusive attitude toward militia. Militia isn't just a bunch of guys in camo, running around out in the woods, preparing to shoot bad guys. Okay, militia is a community that is organized in its own self-defense. Okay, and all of the members of the community are expected to have skills that contribute to that. Maybe you've got some guys in your communities who have reloading equipment, and they need to be teaching younger people how to do reloading. Okay. Maybe you've got an archery club that, you know, is uh, active in the area, and they need to be teaching archery. Archery is one of the very best developments for developing activities for eye-hand coordination. We need to get back to understanding our animals. I'll tell you, in North Carolina, there were places where you couldn't get there from here unless you used a horse or a mule. So, yeah, it's rather necessary to have horses and mules and know how to work with animals and how to feed animals and how to direct activities by animals in order to get work done. So, how many of us know how to harness a horse?
I
How
don't.
many,
I
right,
can tell you, I don't.
right. And how many of us know who is a local blacksmith? Where can you find a blacksmith if you need one? And their blacksmiths can do all sorts of things, all sorts of fabrication work. And we we don't even know who those people are in our communities who have those skills, who have a forge, who know how to work with sheet metal, you know, who can fabricate on the spot. We need those people. We need to know who they are. Even if they're not a member of the assembly, we need to know those resources, and we need to be able to turn to them on a dime and say, hey, Joe, I need to construct a manifold. Here's the instructions. These are things that we need as an assembly, as a militia, to be able to put our thumb and our forefinger on as community resources.
Right. Right. Well, and even down to some simple skills. How many people still know how to sew? Use a sewing machine, sew, put something together, seam something. Um, you know,
Preserve
or
food.
yeah, preserve food. I
There's
mean,
a big one.
there is so much. There is so much that our assembly militias can do. Now, one of the things I've heard is, well, there is no money. And I keep saying we don't need money. We have skills. We can share those skills. We can talk about those skills. We can practice those within our own daily lives, right? And within our assemblies, we don't need a great deal of money to do training. We just
Right.
don't.
No, we don't. One of this past week, we had a seminar on how to salt meat.
Ooh, that would have been great.
Well, it's one of the simplest, most time-honored ways to preserve meat, and it's foolproof if you do it right. I mean, it's very simple. You have to have pure salt, meaning salt with no additives, just salt, and you pat it on the meat. You put the meat on on a rack in a tray so that the blood can drain out of it, because the salting process does create a considerable amount of drainage of the um, liquids from the meat. You leave it there for 5 days in a cool, dark place. Okay, it turns into a brick-like dried product, right? And then you can wrap it up in a cheesecloth and hang it,
Mhm.
and it's good forever.
Wow.
I mean, it, how much more convenient could God make it? But
Right.
we don't know how. We don't know how to test. We don't know what to expect. We don't realize that there may be salt scum on it. We don't realize that there may be brine mold that develops on it, and it's still good. It's just got some harmless brine mold on it.
Mhm.
There are all sorts of things about preservation of food that we no longer know and no longer practice that would be absolutely critical. And how many of us have pure salt available to brine fish or salt meat?
So, one of the things that I know with PKTF, one of their main missions is supposed to be education, right? They're supposed to be helping with providing training resources. How do we get this onto PKTF? How do we get some of these, great webinars or seminars or topics to where PKTF has a library of these types of things from all over our great country, right?
Right.
Um, I think it would be a great use of time for them to actually focus in on assisting how to our assemblies how some of this training, like your meat preservation, would go. I think that would be awesome, and it would be a great help to many of the assemblies to provide that.
Well, PKTF already provides primarily communication-based assistance and insight for things like ham radio and satellite phone service, um, and other things that are necessary in a community. Ham radio, CB, all these different things that keep communications running in the midst of a disaster. So PKTF already does do a considerable amount of assistance and cataloging of resources and that sort of thing as part of its mission to network and um, uh, foster amiable and friendly and supportive communications between all the various levels of the public safety organizations. So they do that, but it's currently more aimed at communication. Um, we do have a need for sort of a national militia archive. Okay, so that people, when they find a really good video or they find a really good training program, uh, or they find a really good resource, like you just found this AMA book from whatever year it was.
1989.
Okay, that's not so long ago.
No.
Um, you know, just say, hey, we found a really good resource here, published in 1989. Here's the publisher. Here's the name of the book. You can go online and start looking for your copy, right? Um, if the militia would establish an archive, somebody has an extra room or a garage, and they suddenly say, oh, well, okay, John has an extra room, and we need a space where we can have books. You know, we need a place where we can store our reference books, where we can have a video library, where we can make copies of videos and have them to hand out to our members. How handy would it be to have a complete disk of information that took you through the entire process of preparing meat for long-term preservation, you know, or how to harvest tree cambium in starvation settings. I mean, it only takes 3 weeks for people to die of starvation.
It's true.
Okay. And it takes even less time to die of dehydration or dysentery.
Right.
So after you've answered the question of water, then what? Uh, you know, we have basically an endless source of food. It's not that pleasant, but it's food. And it's growing around us all over the world on trees. It's called the tree cambium. And it's at the inner layer, the third layer in of the tree structure, the bark of the tree. And you can strip it off in strips and boil it, and it is extremely nutritious. It may not taste that good, but it is extremely nutritious. So you never have to worry about starving again once you learn how to harvest tree cambium. And if you do it in a responsible way, you have an endless resource. You will never starve if you know how to harvest and prepare tree cambium.
Right.
And so, this is the sort of knowledge that our people need so that, push comes to shove, you're 40 miles from nowhere, there's no electricity, and suddenly there's no supply line. Nobody has any food. Well, guess what?
Right. Right. Exactly. So, kind of connecting these dots for everybody within, we've talked about provisions, and we've talked about membership and skill education. This is where collectively we come together and share our skills and our knowledge, the work of our lives, the experiences of our lives, and put that into militia education. Doesn't necessarily have to come from a book. Sometimes, as my dad, I've met a lot of very extremely well educated people who'd be the first ones to die in a situation because they are just completely unprepared in any kind of common sense or life skills to be able to get to where they need to go, not enough sense to come out of the rain, right? Not enough sense to collect the rain so they can survive it, right? So it's this is where our militia, each of our militia committees work together towards setting up these types of trainings and knowledge and resources and skills that we share. It's not just up to the militia committee on education to provide education. It's up to each of us to bring forward our life skills and provide that out there for our militias,
Right.
our people.
Well, foraging, local foraging. If you have a state that has a seashore, uh, what can you forage from the seashore? Which seaweeds are edible that are rich, that you can harvest from the sea. If you have mushrooms growing in your forest, which ones are edible? Which ones produce drugs like painkillers or heart stimulants, or what are the uses of all these microbial type funguses? How do we make use of what's around us? I just gave you an example of the tree cambium. That could keep an entire community from starving to death. Okay, and keep everybody healthy and moving around. In the midst of a disaster where there was no other food, you could still survive just on tree cambium. Okay, now that's a piece of information.
That's right.
That's something that is very, very important, and yet nobody teaches it. Nobody shows you how to do it, and you would be left standing there with a doodad in your hair, starving to death in front of an entire forest full of tree cambium. All right, so we need to have this kind of knowledge for our own sake and for our community's sake, for our state's sake, for our country's sake. And we need to promote that and pass it on so that our children are not left the victims of stupidity in the modern age when everything is so, wrapped up and ready to go. We still
Sorry.
we still need to maintain our own ability to take care of ourselves.
Right, exactly. Well, Anna, we're about an hour in, and unfortunately, my internet is we must be having a problem with our internet tower here, because it's been in and out all day, so it seems to be a little bit flaky. So I think we've covered most of our topics on and I don't really see. I only see like one. So here's the question. If we're not wanting to do away with them, I think that's what they meant. How does the militia step in to actually let them honor the contract?
Well, it's really a matter of us telling our employees what we want and what to do. We've left them in charge for so long that they think they're in charge. And we have to assert ourselves and organize ourselves as the lawful authority to, tell the state governor, okay, well, we've had a flood in this area of the state, and we want the National Guard there to provide support and equipment to the local people, and here's what we need. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. We should, as the State Assembly, as the lawful government, as the employers of these numerous organizations, okay, we should have the wherewithal in our own ranks to make these determinations and to tell the state of state governor exactly what we want and need from the National Guard. Okay. We should also be able to tell the state governor, no, the National Guard needs to stay in state, needs to be operating within our borders and not outside of our borders. Now, we need to assert the actual state over the imported British territorial state of state, because we actually have the superior authority and the superior power, but we haven't been using it. We haven't been organized to use it. And we need to, reassert the power and the directive capability of the people of the state to direct the operations of the state of state.
Okay. Got another question for you. What about breakout like illnesses? Can the natural health committees be part of a new natural Medicare?
Well, our government, our American government, our actual state, has no limitations. The State Assembly can set up its own provisions for a natural health care system, and it can include any number of different therapies. We already have plans to establish not only prosperity unions in every state, but actual medical healthcare spas where people can get chiropractic and massage and water aerobics and herbal medication prescriptions for, medicine, for example. And this can all be paid for. There's no reason why people should have to be paying for this kind of care out of their pockets when this should be part of community and state health care. And preventive medicine, should be a part, and health education. All of this should be part of the mission that we have to promote public safety and health. Those resources should be there.
Right. And so, this question sort of came up, or a statement came up that, Anna's only set together, certain committees on your assemblies. And I'm like, no, we are allowed to create other committees and subcommittees as our assemblies deem necessary.
Right.
Natural health being, one of them, if we wanted to put that, into our assembly practice.
Absolutely.
So,
okay. That's just part and parcel of having an assembly and charting your own course in your own fate, is being able and willing to take the responsibility to determine your needs as they arise. I gave a list of what are common standing committees, that is, committees that virtually all the assemblies had, and will probably need and want to have again. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your own additional committees that serve your own state goals or needs. There's no restriction on anything there. You have the ability to create and determine and solve and do all the things you need to do to bring together solutions to your own state problems and your own needs.
Okay. All right. Great. Had another question pop up. So this is coming from South Africa, from Doretha. Do we send the notice letter to inform them what to do?
Well, no, you send a notice letter to let them know that you're in session. Hello, we're here, we're in session. The land and soil jurisdiction government is in session, and we're taking up our role and responsibility. Okay, well, that's a notice, okay? When you want to tell them what to do, you write them a nice little well-reasoned letter, and you say, regarding the situation at, Ellington Town and their sanitation facility. We would like blah 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 blah. Thank you very much. Blah 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 blah. And you send it to the responsible legislature, okay, or you send it to the responsible officer. You know,
Right.
maybe
It's
the
more of
governor.
a directive. Is that correct? It's more of a directive.
It's polite,
So,
but it's a directive.
yes.
You know, it's
Right.
you're talking to your employees. You don't
Right.
swear at your employees. You don't get
No.
mad at your employees. You're just simply giving them instructions about what you would like done, and it's
Right.
up to them to provide that. You
I
have
always
to
say, sorry, I always say there's the first part is tell them what is deficient, tell them what you want to do, and then tell them again how the two work together, summarize it, and how much time they have to respond. That's
right.
basically the way it goes. Okay.
Well, and it's just, you know, you're not impolite when you employ people. You know, you don't disrespect them in any way. You're simply telling them what you need done. Okay, and so you give them these letters, and they have it's their job. But you have to also look at what their job is in terms of your contract with them. If they have no rule or role, if you've granted them no role concerning health care, for example, um, then you wouldn't ask them to provide services related to healthcare. You'd look at your own contract with them and say, okay, well, I didn't grant them any authorities or empower them with any delegations of authority to address the issues of healthcare. Therefore, it would be inappropriate for me to come back at them and start making demands regarding our healthcare when we never gave them any responsibility or authority or job description or and have no contract with them to provide those services. We wouldn't start talking to them about things that that we didn't already contract with them for, right?
Right.
So we'd want to be careful that we studied our contract with that provider and that we were actually talking in bounds about things that they had responsibility for. Now, using healthcare as an example, we don't have a contract for any level of the federal government to provide any kind of healthcare services or healthcare mandates or directives or to do anything at all regarding our healthcare. So our role would be more to restrict them and hold them to their limitations and say, well, we didn't give you any authority regarding healthcare. We did not delegate any authority to you over issues of public health or individual health. And therefore, we want you to cease and desist addressing our people as if you had some sort of mandate or authority to impose health regimens on our people. Okay, so when it comes to a contract, you have to look at what you contracted for. You know, what did you stipulate and agree to? And you also have to look at what you did not stipulate and did not agree to. And you have to hold both ends of that. You know,
Right.
you have to respect what you didn't ask for and what you didn't, you know, you have to provide and deal with those things you didn't ask the service provider to provide. And you have to keep the service provider from providing services that you didn't contract for. Otherwise,
Right.
they'll usurp upon you and they'll usurp power and authority from you that you never granted them. I just got something.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just got this big, you know, thing on my desk. It was as it turned out, it was a uh, sort of a preemptive announcement where it was claiming that the WHO had already taken a vote and all the members had agreed to give the World Health Organization this sweeping mandate over public health issues throughout the world, right? Well, that was premature. It was not actually voted on, but they kind of pre-released this big headline, right? And I wrote back and said, yes, but we don't have a contract with the WHO.
Correct. So when we talk about the contract, Anna, so that we're really clear and clarified on it, we're talking about the 18 enumerated powers that we did through our constitutions. And
Correct.
when you start looking at that, that flows down through the states. Even though, they use the language, anything that wasn't given to the federal government was relegated to the states. Well, yep,
Right.
but if you reread that language, that state is little STATE, not big S, big TATE.
It says
So
states or people.
yes, exactly. That's exactly right. So
And
that's where it's really important for us to understand what our contracts really are.
right. If it doesn't say it in the Constitution, it wasn't delegated, period.
Correct.
Okay. And you have to look at the intent. They use the Interstate Commerce Clause as kind of a catch-all means of tripping people up and drawing them into their jurisdiction. However, the intent of the Interstate Commerce Clause was to expedite commerce between states and to prevent obstacles to the free flow of commerce. It was not used to regulate commerce in a way that was obstructive or destructive to commerce. All right? And then you have to ask yourself, am I participating in commerce? And if so, am I doing so voluntarily?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there are a lot of different things you have to become aware of in order to operate in this world. But we do have good, solid contracts in place. And oftentimes we have a huge body of material that proves the intention of those contracts so that we don't have to argue about it interminably about what did they mean, because we already know what they meant as a result of things that were said at the time, and the entire surrounding intent is known. Okay, so look at your Constitution, look at the powers that were granted to the federal government, and then take it upon yourself to go, well, that wasn't given to the federal government to talk about. That's not within their range of operations. So anything they say can't be addressed to me. It might be addressed to their employees, right? But it's
Right.
not something that they can talk to me about.
So I have a question that says, who in our state assembly would be contacting the governor? And Texas is a big state. Would we need to set up regional contact liaison for contacting our government?
You want to go through your state assembly chair and you want to present directives of that sort directly from the state assembly chair to the governor of the state of Texas. Okay. You would want to make it very clear that this was a important prerogative and goal for your assembly, that whatever it is that's happening in this region is something that the entire assembly supports. For example, you're on the border. Your county is on the border, and you are suffering just massive influx of people from all over South America and Mesoamerica, and you can't keep up with it. You need the border closed. Well, what do? you go to your state assembly chairperson and the General Assembly, you go before them and you say, hey, look, we got a real problem here. We need more militia help. We need more uh, peacekeeping task force help. We need more peacekeepers here. We need more material assistance. We need the National Guard. We need blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, then the General Assembly takes us in and they mull it about and they ask questions and then they go, this is what we want, you know. And a letter is drafted and it goes out under the signature of the elected assembly chairman or chairwoman, and it goes straight to the state governor. He's given his marching orders. And, you know, the first couple of times that you do this, you might get what the hell's going on and who the hell are you? And then you come back, you explain it, and you go, okay, well, we're here, we're the government, we're the actual government, and you work for us. And so we're telling you what our priorities are.
That's right.
Imagine it.
So the other night, Anna, I was on my soapbox when you came into the coordinators meeting. But my message, and it's very pertinent to this question, is get your state assembly standing.
Right.
Your state, just as you did, Anna, you protected all 50 states by organizing the Federation of States. You
Right.
put the boundaries on it and said, this is ours. The
Right.
states need to put the boundaries on it and say, these counties are ours. This is our state assembly. And we operate from this authority. Okay? And once you get that state standing and you've got things going, then you can really concentrate on formalizing each of your county assemblies, because they're protected by your state assembly. So people, please listen to that message. You need to get your state assembly standing. Concentrate on that. Focus solely on that. If you focus solely on that, when you get that accomplished, Texas, whomever. And
I'm going to have to take that call.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you. So again, you know, you've got to focus on your state assembly, and that's going to be the great protection that you have over all of your counties. But if you don't have that, they're not going to listen to you. The state of states is not going to listen to you. So to all of those to all of those states out there, you know, please focus on your counties. I realize your counties want to meet. That's great. Meet. Start to get the some of the bones together and your people to know each other, to cooperate with each other. But the biggest cooperation you can do right now is to get your state standing. Get your publicly elected office that are vacated, get them filled. That's how you really be able to have an effect on your state of state. You have to have that authority. Okay. So I've got one last comment from, and it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, but I'm going to show it anyhow. Carly on Washington. So looking forward to a checklist of required functioning committees per pillar to consider for standing. Thank you both so much for the great information. So Carly, throughout this series that we've been doing on America Some Assembly Required, you see the 4 pillars chart. And on that 4 pillars chart, if you pause the video, in each of these, I've been showing the actual committees for each of the assemblies as we've moved forward. And so if you really look at that, and your state coordinator has this list. They've always had the list. And so you need to be asking that, because there are 31 standing committees of each of the collective General Assembly and all of the sub-assemblies. There's 31. Now, that's not an exclusive list, but it is it's really the basic committees of your assembly. You can create other committees, but those are the ones that are going to make your state function, and those are the ones that are going to make your state stand. So if you've not been presented those committees, you need to be talking to your coordinator to get that list. Okay? So everybody, thanks so much for your questions today, and the great comments in the chat. I really appreciate it. And lots of great information in this series on militia. And I'm going to sign off for today. Thank you very much. Keep assembling, keep working on it. You can get there. Bye.